What if I told you that the most dangerous person in a horror story isn't actually the monster with fangs hiding in the woods?
Right.
It's the person standing inside your own house, promising to protect you from it.
Ooh. Yeah, because we're so conditioned to look for, the obvious threats.
Exactly. But when you
Yeah.
step into Beacon Hills specifically, the absolute labyrinth that is season 2, those clean lines of morality just completely
You
evaporate.
really do. It
Yeah.
becomes this massive study in survival psychology.
Yeah.
You aren't just dealing with a clear-cut protagonist versus an antagonist anymore. You are dropped into this ecosystem of overlapping predators,
Mm.
all of them operating from completely different moral frameworks, and trying to determine who actually holds the title of the season's ultimate villain becomes this incredibly complex psychological puzzle.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are navigating the dingy, murky gray zones of this specific chapter of Beacon Hills.
It's a dark place to be.
It is. And we are pulling all the canon, the lore, and the deep thematic analysis straight from Paul, from Teen Wolf News and the official Teen Wolf Wiki. Because in this specific landscape, there are no accidents. Every single choice these characters make is an intentional thematic signal about trauma, manipulation, and power.
So true.
And looking at all those intersecting agendas, I am staking my claim right out of the gate.
Oh, here we go.
Amidst a literal minefield of bad actors, Alpha Derek Hale is the absolute worst of the bunch. The first and the worst.
I'm going to have to firmly push back on that.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Labeling Derek as the ultimate villain completely ignores the overarching context of his actions.
Okay, but
Like, his behavior is deeply problematic. There is no arguing that. But it has to be viewed through the lens of desperate systemic survival.
I mean, survival is a strong word for what he was doing.
But he is preparing for an impending, largely unseen threat, the Alpha Pack. When you contrast Derek's preemptive tactical maneuvers with the acute, visceral, and localized atrocities committed by the other antagonists in town, Derek's actions start looking a lot more like grim necessity rather than pure villainy.
See, I don't buy the necessity argument when the methods are this insidious. Okay, let's unpack this.
Go for it.
Let's start with Derek's so-called recruitment strategy.
What if I told you that all of this could go away? The side effects, the symptoms, all of it.
When you actually look at the mechanics of what he is doing, it is fundamentally indistinguishable from the proactive, predatory grooming tactics of a cult leader.
Calling him a cult leader feels like a massive leap.
Is it, though?
Well, yeah, a militant pragmatist, maybe, but a cult leader implies a level of psychological sadism that I don't think Derek possesses. He was drafting soldiers for a war they didn't even know was coming.
But look at the how, not just the why. Look at the specific psychology of who he actively targeted. If he just needed a biological army, he could have bitten the star athletes, right? The kids with confidence and stability. Instead, he meticulously hunted for the cracks in the social foundation.
Right, he looked for the vulnerable ones.
Exactly. He went after the most broken, vulnerable, and disenfranchised teenagers in town.
Well, he targeted the vulnerability matrix. From a psychological standpoint, that is how radicalization happens.
Yeah.
When individuals are experiencing severe psychological distress, physical illness, or deep social isolation, their cognitive defenses are just lowered. They are desperate for an intervention.
And Derek weaponizes that desperation flawlessly. I mean, he finds Isaac Lahey, a kid actively trapped in a nightmare of a physically and emotionally abusive household.
Absolutely spotless.
So sad.
And then he zeroes in on Erica Reyes, who is suffering from severe epilepsy, enduring extreme side effects from her medication.
Yeah, she was going through a lot.
And then there's Vernon Boyd, the kid sitting alone at lunch, working a dead-end job, practically invisible to the rest of the world. Derek's doesn't offer them mentorship. He offers them a Felshian bargain.
The promise of absolute biological and social salvation.
Yes. He plays the manipulative dealer. He looks these desperate kids in the eye and promises that all of their pain, the physical symptoms, the human vulnerabilities, the fear will completely go away if they just take his bite.
It's a heavy pitch.
But the catch is horrifying. By altering their biology, he permanently severs them from their families, their educations, and their humanity. He creates a manufactured dependency.
Which is, it's the core mechanism of isolation tactics.
Exactly.
By making them supernaturally dependent on him as an alpha, he replaces their existing flawed support structures with himself as the sole, unquestionable authority figure.
And how does he maintain that authority? Through systematic physical abuse and psychological destabilization.
You're talking about the training.
Yes, there is that deeply disturbing moment where he physically breaks Isaac's arm during training.
I'm teaching you how to survive.
Yeah, that was intense.
It isn't just brutal, it is a textbook trauma bonding technique. He hurts Isaac and then rationalizes it by saying he would heal.
Right, reinforcing the idea that Derek is both the source of the pain and the architect of their newfound resilience.
Exactly. He breaks them down physically so they learn he is their only path forward. So, how can you defend a man who proactively orchestrates the psychological destruction of vulnerable teenagers just to build a personal enforcer squad?
Well, I am not defending the morality of his methods.
Good.
But we have to evaluate the scale and the nature of the violence. Derek's proactive grooming operates on a structural, psychological level. It is cold, yes.
Very.
But if we are debating the ultimate villain, we have to pivot and look at the immediate, localized, visceral torture being inflicted by the other active on the board.
You mean the Argents?
The acute atrocities committed by the Argents and Matt Daehler operate on a level of monstrous physical cruelty that completely eclipses Derek's militant pragmatism.
I mean, if we are weighing psychological destruction against physical cruelty, let's put Victoria Argent on the scale.
Oh, Victoria is a fascinating case study in cognitive dissonance and compartmentalization.
She is terrifying.
What's fascinating here is that her overarching psychological framework is defensive maternal instinct, but her morality is ruthlessly flexible to the point of sociopathy.
Yeah, it's wild.
Real-world psychological research on individuals who commit acts of extreme cruelty often points to this exact profile. The person whose cold-blooded violence is completely compartmentalized to secure the safety of their defined in-group. She truly believes she is a protective disciplinarian.
Which is the most terrifying kind of villain.
Absolutely.
The one who can bake a casserole, smile at the neighbors, and then commit a war crime in the basement, fully believing she holds the moral high ground.
Exactly. I mean, look at how she gains a tactical foothold at the high school. She orchestrates the abduction of the school principal.
Oh, that scene.
Are you aware there's been an alarming drop in academic achievement and test scores over the past few semesters?
Excuse me?
It's led the parents of Beacon Hills to the unfortunate conclusion that you may no longer be suited to the position of school principal.
You can't fire me.
True, but we can torture you.
She literally uses an electrified cattle prod on a human being to force his resignation.
So messed up.
Using a tool meant for livestock isn't an accident. It is a psychological tactic to strip the victim of their humanity.
And she doesn't stop at adults.
Yeah.
When she discovers that a 16-year-old Scott McCall is still seeing her daughter Allison, she doesn't ground her kid or call the police. She systematically attempts to execute a minor.
She weaponizes his specific biological vulnerability. She triggers a lethal wolfsbane-induced asthma attack and locks him in a room to slowly suffocate to death.
It's brutal.
It's entirely premeditated just to maintain control over Allison's social circle. That is localized, hyper-focused cruelty.
Yeah.
If Victoria represents organized, compartmentalized trauma responses, we have to look at what happens when trauma is completely unmanaged, reactive, and narcissistic. That brings us to Matt Daehler.
Who Paul from Teen Wolf News aptly describes as
Matt Daehler. Big old baby bitch boy.
It sounds dismissive, but it perfectly captures his psychological profile.
It really does.
Matt is entirely defined by severe psychological destabilization and unresolved acute childhood trauma.
The pool incident.
Right. He was humiliated, thrown into a pool, and left to nearly drown while a group of teenagers laughed at him.
I'm dying, and they're laughing.
He experienced a profound, visceral loss of power and agency.
And his response isn't to, seek therapy.
No, definitely not.
His response is to become a psychological stalker lurking behind the lens of a camera until he stumbles into godlike power.
What is mechanically fascinating about Matt is the concept of surrogate power. He gains control of the Kanima, essentially enslaving a transformed Jackson Whittemore. Matt was powerless and drowning, so he subconsciously bonds with an overpowered reptilian creature to reclaim his agency. He uses Jackson as a weaponized extension of his own unresolved trauma to systematically execute the members of the swim team. He racks up a massive body count.
But see, you were actually proving my point about why Derek is worse.
How so?
Look at the parameters of what you just described.
Yeah.
Matt and Victoria are both operating out of highly predictable, localized psychological framework.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Victoria is protecting her family unit through extreme prejudice. Matt is lashing out from a specific incident of localized trauma, targeting the swim team. Their violence, as terrifying and visceral as it is, has specific boundaries.
They are reactive?
Exactly. They are blind to the grander systemic machinations of Beacon Hills. Derek's violence does not have those boundaries.
You're saying Derek's pragmatism makes him a wider threat.
Oh, absolutely. Here's where it gets really interesting. Derek's absolute disregard for human life extends far beyond his immediate survival.
Give me an example.
When Lydia Martin miraculously survives Peter's bite but fails to manifest traditional werewolf traits,
He jumps to conclusions.
She failed the test.
Lydia's different.
I know. At night, she turns into a homicidal walking snake.
I'm not going to let you kill her.
Who said I was going to do it?
he brands this entirely innocent, traumatized teenage girl a homicidal walking snake.
Well, because he suspects she is the Kanima.
But he doesn't know. It's lethal pragmatism based on a hunch. And even later, when he discovers that Jackson is actually the Kanima, Derek's response doesn't change.
Your friend Jackson, are we planning to kill him or save him?
Save him. Save him.
He still wants to kill him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to find a cure for Jackson, a teenager whose mind has been hijacked. He just wants to put him down like a rabid dog. It's a profound institutional betrayal of the supernatural community.
It is pretty harsh.
His lineage brought this affliction to the town, and instead of taking responsibility for the fallout, his immediate instinct is to use lethal force to erase his own tactical complications.
That pragmatism is incredibly cold, I'll give you that.
Thank you.
However, if the debate hinges on institutional betrayal, hypocritical corruption, and an absolute disregard for human life, we have to examine Gerard Argent.
Ugh, the patriarch of the hunting world.
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Gerard is the absolute epitome of profound patriarchal corruption. He arrives in Beacon Hills and instantly shatters his own family's lifelong hunter's code.
Just throws it out entirely.
We have a code. Not when they murder my daughter.
That code was the only ethical barrier preventing full-scale slaughter. Gerard throws it out the window, declaring an omnicidal war where his literal stated policy is that even innocent supernaturals are just bodies waiting to be cut in half.
And he weaponizes his own family's grief over Kate's death to justify a literal genocide.
Right. And his methods are inherently sadistic. I mean, he abducts and severely beats Stiles Stilinski.
That was so hard to watch. Styles is completely human.
Exactly. He possesses no supernatural healing and poses absolutely no physical threat to Gerard. Why do it? It is asymmetrical psychological warfare. You beat the helpless human friend to psychologically fracture the alpha and his allies.
Just pure cruelty.
And he keeps Erica and Boyd bound, suspended, and continuously electrocuted in a basement to break their spirits. But the ultimate twist of Gerard's villainy is the revelation of his true motive.
Oh, the fact that it was all an elaborate, bloody ruse.
Precisely. He didn't care about cleansing the town of a perceived supernatural blight.
Not at all.
He was a malignant narcissist, terrified of his own mortality. He was dying of terminal cancer.
Yeah.
He orchestrated this massive destructive war, manipulating his son, his granddaughter, and the entire supernatural ecosystem for one singular reason.
To get the bite.
To maneuver an alpha into a position where he could force a bite and cure his own illness.
I will concede that Gerard's narcissism is corruption at its absolute purest. It is chilling.
It really is.
But we have to look at the cause and effect here.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for the actual victims in this town? Who ultimately pays the price for all this maneuvering?
Well, the teenagers.
Yes. Gerard's actions eventually destroyed his own legacy, yes. But the tragic, lasting fallout for Erica, Boyd, and Isaac, that fallout was entirely engineered by Derek.
So you are arguing that Derek set the board for their dissipation?
I am arguing that Derek created an entirely new axis of harm. Victoria, Matt, Gerard, They were monsters, but they operated out of existing institutional frameworks, the Twisted Hunter's Code or personal grudges.
Okay.
But Derek went into the high school. He took vulnerable kids who had nothing to do with this war, stripped them of their agency for his own selfish consolidation of power, and put them on the front lines.
He did put them right in the middle of it.
He thrust them into a crossfire between an omnicidal narcissist and a reptilian serial killer. He is the one who painted the targets on their backs, leading to unimaginable suffering and eventually death. He bears the heaviest moral weight because he broke the very children he swore to protect as their alpha.
But you cannot ignore the collateral damage caused by the Argent's manipulation, specifically regarding Allison.
Oh, Allison.
This raises an important question. When we evaluate villainy, how much does the chain of causality matter? Because Gerard's manipulation triggers a catastrophic, tragic fallout for Allison late in the season.
The infamous heel turn, where she completely abandons her moral compass.
No, run! Go!
It is a terrifying psychological pivot. Allison is consumed by carefully fed, highly manicured lies from Gerard about her mother Victoria's suicide.
He just plays her like a fiddle.
Gerard weaponizes her profound grief, and Allison goes full throttle into evil. She shuts off her empathy entirely as a coping mechanism. She becomes a ruthless, sadistic hunter, tracking and shooting arrows at a fleeing Erica and Boyd.
Hunting her own classmates through the woods. It is incredibly hard to watch.
It is. But her monstrous behavior is a reactive, trauma-induced echo of Gerard. She is essentially a weapon that he aimed and fired.
Right.
And if we zoom out and look at the entire ecosystem of Beacon Hills in Season 2, they are all reacting to the sudden, aggressive, predatory ecosystem that Derek Hale cultivated. It is a chain reaction of escalating force.
That's a lot of blame to put on Derek, but also not enough.
And Derek was only cultivating that aggressive ecosystem because he was acting out of desperate survival.
Back to the Alpha Pack.
He knew the Alpha Pack was coming. They were an incredibly dangerous, overwhelming, unseen force. If he didn't build an army, however ruthlessly, his entire community would be wiped out. His intent, unlike Gerard's selfishness or Matt's vengeance, was survival against an impossible threat.
But survival at what cost? That is the ultimate tension of the entire season. Is it ever justifiable to proactively destroy the lives of innocent teenagers? To abuse them and strip them of their humanity just because you are afraid of a bigger monster coming down the road?
And on the flip side, is it any more justifiable to torture a high school principal with a cattle prod or innocent swimmers with a reptilian surrogate just because you have unmanaged personal trauma or a twisted, narcissistic sense of family duty?
Wow. It is an absolute masterclass in moral ambiguity.
It truly is.
And that's exactly what the detailed breakdowns from Paul from Teen Wolf News and the Wiki highlight so brilliantly.
Yeah.
The lines are hopelessly, permanently blurred.
Yeah.
You have Derek, a proactive predator preparing for war, utilizing the isolation mechanics of a cult leader. And then you have the Argents and Matt, who are reactive, traumatized monsters inflicting acute, visceral horror on anyone who gets caught in their blast radius.
Neither side possesses the moral high ground. The season is a perfect, dark illustration of how power and fear corrupt different psychological profiles in different ways.
Exactly.
The labels of hero and villain stop mattering when the actions become indistinguishable in the dark.